Welcome y'all to Robyn on the Farm. Today I'm going to share with you a fantastic loaf of beginner sourdough bread. This is a small rustic loaf of sourdough bread and it is just great for beginners. There's no stretch and folds, it's a same-day method, and it's super simple. I have uncomplicated sourdough. It's so easy, and I know that you can make this bread. So this just makes a gorgeous little loaf of rustic sourdough bread. It's a boule, it's beautiful. Now, if you're getting started with sourdough and you don't quite have an established starter, or maybe you're struggling a little bit with your starter, well, this is my big old established sourdough starter that I've had going for years and years and years. I started this a long time ago, and this is a mature, active, fantastic, strong starter. Now, what I've done is I have freeze-dried my starter. So if you want to, you can try out my sourdough starter. This is a great shortcut to sourdough. So I have this freeze-dried sourdough starter. It's 20 grams of sourdough starter, and you can use half of it and put the rest away for later in case you have any problems. But this is such an easy way to get started with sourdough. It comes with instructions that tell you exactly how to revive your sourdough starter, and you can be making bread like this in just a few days. So that's a great option. I will have the link below to my website. It's robynonthefarm.com. But this is a great little loaf of sourdough bread. This is the kind that I like to make when I want some sourdough with dinner, because I can have this ready in as little as 5 hours, and we can eat this entire loaf with dinner. So this is a great option for sourdough bread. Now also, if you see this cute little beeswax bread bag, we also have these on our website. My daughters and I are making these together, and we're having so much fun. These are great for storing your sourdough bread in. So let's get started on our sourdough bread. It's really easy to make. I will show you exactly how to make it step by step so that you can have success with your sourdough bread. All we need for this small rustic loaf of sourdough bread are 4 ingredients. All we need is our sourdough starter, some water, some salt, and some bread flour, and that is it. So this is a really simple loaf to throw together. Now today I'm going to give you the measurements in grams and also in cups and spoons if you'd rather bake that way. Not everybody has a scale, so I'm going to give it to you both ways, and the recipe is going to be down in the description that you can print off if you want to follow along. Now to get started, I'm going to start with my sourdough starter. This is my sourdough starter Hester. This is my classic sourdough starter that's made with unbleached bread flour. Hester is named after my great-great-grandmother, and she is a nice, strong, established sourdough starter. This is great stuff. If you need a sourdough starter, then this is what is on my website. This is my freeze-dried sourdough starter, Hester. Now, let's get started. You want to zero out your scale. If you're using a scale, you want to make sure it says 0 grams. And I'm going to use 85 grams of my sourdough starter, or that's 1/3 of a cup. Just a little bit more. This is the hardest part, trying to get just the right amount of starter into your bowl. Okay, that's pretty close. I can always scoop out just a little bit. Okay, 87 grams, I'm gonna call that good. That's perfect. Now, before I add my water, I wanna zero out my scale. Next, I want 200 grams or 3/4 of a cup of warm water. You want it to be warm. It just helps it to rise and get activated quicker, but you don't want it to be hot because you don't want to kill your wild yeast. So about 100 degrees is perfect. So 200 grams, make sure your scale is zeroed out, 200 grams or 3/4 of a cup of water. Okay. Now I'm going to take my spurtle and I'm just going to mix this around a little bit. This just helps as you go to add your salt and your flour if your starter and your water is already mixed together. Okay, I'm going to zero out my scale again, and it's time for our bread flour. I'm going to use 325 grams of bread flour, which is about 2½ cups. So just add that right on in there. Like I said, 325 grams or about 2½ cups. Okay, that looks perfect. Yep, it was about 2½ cups. All right, zero out your scale one more time. It's really easy to forget to do that. All right, next is our salt. I want to use this Redmond's Real Salt. This is an ancient fine sea salt that I really like, and I like this little pour top when I'm making sourdough and measuring everything in grams. But I want 8 grams of salt, which is 1½ teaspoons. You can see this pretty pink color of this salt. This is mined in Utah, which is really cool, North America. So 8 grams of salt or 1½ teaspoons. And those are all of our ingredients. I'm going to move my scale and I'm going to take my spurtle and I'm just going to give this a really good mix. You want to take a few minutes to mix your dough really well. If you don't have a spurtle, you can use a Danish dough whisk, you can use a spoon, you can use a wooden spoon, whatever you want to use. But this is going to take a little bit of elbow grease. So I'm going to take a few minutes and mix this up really well. Now a lot of times after I have gotten it mixed together as good as I can with the spurtle, sometimes I'll go in with my hand and just kind of give it a last good mix. Just try to get all of the dry patches of flour mixed up really well. And this is going to be just a really shaggy dough. It doesn't need to look smooth and nice like it would if you were making a yeast bread after you knead it. This is exactly what you want it to look like when it's all mixed up. Now I'm going to cover up my dough so it doesn't dry out during the bulk ferment. And I'm going to let this just sit on my counter for the bulk ferment. And it can go anywhere from 3 hours to 12 hours, whatever you want. And what you want it to do is to expand a bit and kind of pull away from the sides. It's going to look smoother than it does now, and you'll know that it's bulk fermented enough. Now this is a really simple recipe, so don't get too concerned with the bulk ferment. This bread is going to turn out. This is just a really easy sourdough recipe. So I'm going to let this go probably about 3 or 4 hours, and I'm going to show it to you then. Then you'll know exactly what yours should look like. My dough has been sitting on the countertop for 3½ hours. You can see that it's expanded and it's smoother. If I let it bulk ferment for longer, it'll continue to rise, but it really doesn't need to, and you can actually over ferment your dough. So I think 4, 5, 6 hours is great. Let it work into your day. This recipe has 1 set of stretch and folds, which is what I'm doing now. Lift it from one side, stretch it up, and fold it over to the other side. At the start of this step, the dough is really stretchy and it quickly gets harder to pull up and over. Stretch and folds help develop the gluten in your bread, which gives it structure and a nice chew. So now we've done the stretch and folds and we've shaped our dough. Now I'm going to let this sit on my countertop for an hour, but you can even throw it into the fridge and bake it later, even up to 3 days later. After your dough has rested on the countertop or in the fridge for at least an hour, then it's time to score your dough. This is the step that my daughter does. She's the creative one in the family, so I make the dough and she loves to score the dough. She's actually the one who sews all of our beeswax bread bags. She taught herself to sew several years ago and makes quilts and crochets, and she's just super creative. I told her to keep this score really simple today, but when you score your bread, you want to go down about 1/4 to 1/2 inch deep, and this just keeps your bread from bursting while it bakes. So they are pretty, but they also serve a really important purpose. So be sure to score your sourdough bread and have a little bit of fun with it. Get creative at this point. You can use just a sharp knife, or you can get one of these sourdough loms. They work great. It's like cutting through butter. We love to use these. Now it is time to bake our sourdough bread. I'm going to do a cold bake, which means you don't preheat your oven or your Dutch oven. So I'm going to throw this dough into my cold Dutch oven, and I have well oiled the bottom of this so that the bread doesn't stick at all. I'm going to put the top on, I'm going to throw it into the cold oven, set it for 450 degrees, and let it bake for 40 minutes. Look at that. Now I'm going to take the top off, put the oven down to 425 degrees, and let it brown just for another 5 to 8 minutes. And then our bread is done. Look how good our small rustic loaf of beginner sourdough bread looks. It is gorgeous. I love making this bread, and I'm always so proud of myself when it comes out of the oven because it is gorgeous. And the funny thing is, it doesn't matter how many loaves I make, every time it comes out of the oven, my kids come and admire it and give me praises. It's the best. Okay, it's time to cut into our rustic small loaf of sourdough bread. I can't wait. I've let this cool for a bit and it looks so good. Let's go ahead and cut into the middle. Oh, this bread looks so good and it smells so good. I cannot wait to eat some of this. I love my sourdough bread toasted. How do you like yours? Oh, look at that crumb. That is a perfect crumb for sourdough bread. And as easy as this loaf was, oh, it's just a great small rustic loaf. Isn't it gorgeous? So I know that you can make this loaf. If you're a beginner, follow the directions, you can make this. It's so simple and it's so yummy. I will leave the recipe down in the description for this small rustic loaf of beginner sourdough bread. This is a great recipe whether you're a beginner or not. I'll also leave my website, robynonthefarm.com, down there if you're interested in any of the freeze-dried sourdough starter or the beeswax bread bags. Thanks so much for being here with me on Robyn on the Farm. I will see you next time.
Robyn's in the kitchen, dough beneath her hands, wheat from the fields and eggs from her land. Sunlight through the window, a warm golden glow. She's working hard to make that dough.